I'm Maureen Ballatori, and this is Spilled Salt, a podcast on the thrills and spills from the food, beverage, and agriculture industries. Today's guest is a real firecracker. Damian Mason is a multifaceted professional in the agriculture and business sectors. He's an entrepreneur, a speaker, farm owner, author, podcaster, and former comedian. He, as a young kid, thought that he would never end up in the agriculture industry. Similar to me, actually. I didn't think growing up on a farm that I would be working in the industry years later, but here we are. Damian's presentations as a speaker focus on the Asians of agriculture, addressing topics such as immigration, population, regulation, and inflation in the agricultural sector. I'm in a group that Damian hosts called the Business of Agriculture Success Group, and what has come to my attention is the knowledge that Damian has about the international landscape as it relates to agriculture, which is wildly fascinating. He talks a little bit about that today, as well as his story to the work that he's doing now. Enjoy the conversation. Damian Mason, how the heck are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me, Maureen.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining me today. I always like to start these in the beginning, as one should. So take us back to the early days of young Damian Mason. What were your interests that led to the start of your career?
Depending how far we go back, I just was explaining to somebody, I was in Nebraska for a speaking engagement last week, and then he was talking about his sheep business. And I said, when I was about 9 years old, or even a couple years younger than that, maybe, I used to tell everybody that when I grow up, I'm going to be a successful sweeper salesman and a sheep rancher. And everybody said, "Oh, that's interesting." So I had a lot of different ideas, but I was going to be a sheep guy. And I remember I went to the Indiana State Fair with my father, and I walked around the sheep barn, and I talked to all those show sheep people. And I was too little back then to understand the difference between commercial versus like show people. And I picked up business cards from people, and I learned all the sheep breeds, and I just decided I was going to raise Shropshires. I don't know why, because I was 8 or 9 years
Why
old.
sheep?
I was raised on a
Just
dairy
thought they
farm.
were cool?
I was raised on a dairy farm, and maybe I decided I was going to rebel against my upbringing. So I decided sheep was the thing to do. And then there was this always idea of like, what Australia must look like or the West must look like. So I was raised in northeastern Indiana. So somehow sheep just worked for me because it was different. So there was that. And that was a 10-year 4-H member. I was an FFA. Started doing man labor, I guess, by the time I was about 12. The farm got expanded, and that was during the 1980s. So I was 12 years old in 1981, which, if your listeners know anything about the history of agriculture and agricultural economics, the absolute proverbial what hit the fan in 1981. And so, I was a 12-year-old kid, and that's when, I'm in 6th grade. I was a bigger kid. I was able to do a lot of the work. I went from bottle feeding the calves at age 8 to then by the time I was 12, I was operating a lot of machinery and, utility man around the dairy, move the heifers, go down to the other farm and check the steers, make sure the feeder's good, break the ice in the water, whatever that thing was.
Right.
So all hell broke loose. Things got terrible in 1981. And that was really, my coming of age from age 12 to graduate from high school. Was the depths of hell in agriculture. So to stay in this business, by the time I got out of college, I had no interest at all in being in agriculture. I absolutely said, this ship is about sunk unless you inherited land and you're like in a real good family farming situation with a ton of held capital. This is not the place for any young aspiring person because there's just no opportunity. Companies.
And what happened? What happened in 1981? Because I grew up on a dairy farm as well, and I was born in 1986. And so my dad had to get out of dairy and sold all the cows when I was like 5 or 6.
1981. So we came off the 70s. The 70s were amazing for agriculture. We had an expanding economy here. We had an expanding economy in the world, an expanding population. The United States, you're talking about going back 50 years ago, 1975, for instance, it was just a real different world. There was Brazil, but like you could go and buy an acre in Brazil for $1. And there were speculator buyers that did that. And there was not any, Brazil was not Brazil 50 years ago. They had some farms, but it was pretty damn primitive. So the United States really was the place, and Russia. And back then Russia included the Ukraine. So there was the United States, Canada had agriculture. We were amazing, and we just produced the heck out of stuff. And then we had this stagflation, climbing interest, and stagnant economy, and persistent inflation, much due to overspending by government, which is what usually creates inflation, as we've just seen. So everybody wants to say what caused the 80s for agriculture. And some people say, well, it was Jimmy Carter and the grain embargo that he created in 1980 because he was going to teach Russia a lesson, which what that really did was we decided we were going to not sell grain. Well, then the rest of the country amped up production and ramped up production. That's what usually happens.
The rest of the world, you mean? You said the rest of the country. You mean the rest of the world?
The rest of the world. The rest of the world ramped up production because when there's this demand, hey, my God, we can get $9 bushel wheat or whatever it was back then. These other countries just started learning how to produce.
Yeah.
So that's really part of it. We had 18% inflation. Then on the home front, there was this situation where because high interest just became so pervasive, it became accepted. And so, I'm going to expand my operation. Whether you're a warehouse or a factory or a farm, whatever it was, you were using 18% leverage, 18% money, and leveraging your assets. So a lot of farms were completely over levered and obligating 18% money. So when you see a downturn in demand and then commodity prices hit the skids, and then we were also overproduced. And this is what a lot of folks don't want to admit, but we were really generally overproduced through the 80s, through the 90s. And then that changed with the China miracle about 25 years ago, beginning of 2000, 2005 is when the China miracle China became ascendant. And when 1.4 billion people literally double their caloric consumption, and not just double their caloric consumption, move from some rice to pork chops, it changed the entire global demand structure. But the 80s were a real difficult time. One of my stories I explained, Maureen, that I don't do that walking uphill to school both ways in a blizzard. I just to somebody maybe that's your age and younger, and I say, hey, I'm not doing all that. I'm just telling you that I was there when the shit hit the fan in 1981. There were farms that were so underwater. Let's just say you were like the dairy farm your father had or that my family had, milked 50, 60, 100 cows, farmed 500 acres, very normal. That's how farming looked like in the 1980s. Maybe you had a confinement hog sow farrowing barn, and then you also fed out pigs and you farmed 800 acres. That was a very normal farming situation from where you are in upstate New York all the way through Nebraska, right? A lot of those farming operations, and again, I'm from northeastern Indiana, they would get 80% loan to value. And so you would be buying land and then maybe you stuck a hog barn on it. And you did that in 1980. And literally 1 year later, the land value dropped by more than 50%. In many cases, the land value within a year dropped by 50%. Well, the bank sitting there had an 80% loan.
Right.
There were assets that were so underwater, the bank wouldn't even repossess them. It was better for them to let to wait it out. Think about that. When I want to explain stuff to somebody younger, I'm like, I'm not doing walking uphill to the blizzard, but I'm just telling you, there were assets that were so bad in agriculture, the bank didn't even want them back because they're taking back something they got 80% loan on, and it's worth 30% less than that. So it was smarter for them in many cases to say, hey, you keep chugging along and make some payments. And that's a real story.
Wow. Fascinating. I did not realize that. No one's ever told me that story and hasn't come up in my research. So I appreciate that. So, all right. So college, you said, screw ag, not for me. This has been terrible. Anything else but that. And that one happened.
I went to Purdue University, the land grant school in Indiana, and pursued a degree in agricultural economics. I was going to be an agronomist because I was in FFA soil judging and I loved soils. There was a thing in Indiana called T by 2000. Maybe it wasn't even Indiana. It was by USDA. It was all about making tolerable levels of soil erosion by the year 2000. And I remember reading books about this. And I was on the soil judging team. And I was going to be an agronomist. And then I picked up a biochemistry book. And I'm like, holy crap, this is going to be really hard. So I switched and became an agricultural economics major. So my degree is in agricultural economics. I worked in a ceiling tile factory. There was still a lot of manufacturing in Indiana. There's a touch less than there was back then. Worked in a ceiling tile factory for 3 summers to pay for Purdue. Landscaped, baled hay, did all that kind of thing to pay for school. Bartended. but my first corporate job was with DuPont. I was a sales intern for DuPont after my junior year at Purdue. And I thought, man, I don't know if this is going to work out, because also DuPont wasn't hiring anyone full time. There was a real glut still in I graduated from Purdue in 92. There was still not much hiring that went on. So I did another internship for industrial sales in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I thought, man, you know what? I'm going to get into some sort of industrial sales, some sort of thing that's away from ag. So my first job out of college, I sold lighting products for Cooper Industries, which is now part of Ethan Corporation. And I'm like, hey, I'm in corporate. I remember thinking to myself, oh, I've skinned a fat hog here, man. I'm out of ag. I'm in Las Vegas 3 weeks into my new sales job. We're at a corporate dinner. I'm drinking a 22-ounce Foster's. I've got
everything's shiny. Yeah.
I'm staying at a nice hotel in Las Vegas, and I'm like, huh. And you know what? Three years ago, I'm out there in charge of the freestall barn, literally out there scraping shit on the dairy farm, and I'm thinking, man, I'm out of ag. This is the way to go. And I lasted a year and a half in corporate. I decided, wait a minute. Your advancement in a large corporation is more dependent on your ability to laugh at the boss's bad jokes and nod your head and not be contrarian, a word that you've used to describe me, Maureen. So I didn't last very long in corporate. It's not because I got fired. I was actually selling. They couldn't believe when I turned in my resignation, but I quit my job a year and a half into corporate.
Yeah. Because you didn't want to play that game, which I totally get. So then how did you decide to become a speaker?
So in 1994, I submitted my resignation a year and a half into working for the big company, selling lighting products. And I was doing fine. Like I said, they gave me a raise and a promotion. They were quite surprised when I said, hey, I'm out of here. I quit my job in July of 94, August 1st, 1994, kind of a anniversary I still celebrate every August 1st. To become a professional Bill Clinton impersonator. And so there's probably somebody listening to your show is like, whoa, this guy's making stuff up. So that's kind of how that was the way things worked.
Is that a joke?
No. So while I was working for Cooper, they sent me to San Diego. I was covering Indiana. I was supposed to be in charge of Indiana. They called and said, hey, we got a problem in San Diego. Turns out they used manufacturers' representatives for the most part to go to market. They had to fire our guy because he had some criminal charges. So they grabbed me and another young guy and said, just going to go out there and be in charge of San Diego for a few weeks until we can get this covered, because we didn't have wives. We had
sure.
Sure, that's why they didn't say that's why they grabbed us, but that's why they grabbed us.
Yeah.
So, I'm like a 23, 24-year-old guy. I'm out there in San Diego. So on Halloween of 93, I dressed up as Bill Clinton and went to nightclubs, and I won a costume contest dressed up as Bill Clinton. I had my hair dyed, and I, wearing a suit and some fat padding. I put on makeup to age myself, and I could talk like Bill Clinton. I could say, "How y'all doing? Hey, Maureen, how'd you like to be an intern? Oh, baby, and I could talk like that. I could be funny." So I won this costume contest, and I took the mic. The way I won it was I took the mic and played like Bill Clinton, and everybody laughed, and then that cemented it for me, and I won cash in a costume contest. Cooper Industries sees the pictures that my buddy sends them, and they're like, hey, you want to come to this trade show? You want to come? I would get flown around then by the company and be the humor relief at these boring lighting events. So, because think about it, you've got a bunch of people gathered to talk about recessed lighting fixtures. Nobody gives a damn about that. So they would put me on stage, and I could be funny for 5 minutes and then stand around and take some pictures and look like Bill Clinton. So when they sent me from San Diego back to Indiana, it was a day much like the day you just described. We're recording this in February, about -6. And I said, wait a minute. I was just out there in the palm trees looking at the Pacific Ocean. Now they got me back in Indiana. It's -6. And I'm not sure this is, and plus I'm not sure I'm digging on this corporate thing.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm not in charge of my own destiny.
Right.
So I started working up the act and I printed up, I went to Kinko's. For you young people, Google that. I went to Kinko's. And I had this girl at Kinko's draw a caricature of Bill Clinton, and I said, perfect. And we put it on a
someone like behind the counter, like you just walked in there and said, hey, can you draw? Oh my God.
Yeah, and she drew a caricature of Bill Clinton. And I said, that's perfect. And I printed up business cards that said Executive Entertainment, obviously a spoof on the executive branch.
Yep.
And my company for 31 years has been called Executive Entertainment. It started by me going into Kinko's and saying, can you draw? And she drew a caricature of Bill Clinton. And that was my business card with my phone number on. No cell phones, no email back then, no internet back then.
Wow.
It was
Oh my
1994.
God.
And then I started selling this act. The act was really rough. I mean, I would walk into a room and look like Bill Clinton and come up with some funnies to say for 5 minutes and then glad hand around and shake pictures. Then it dawned on me that to get paid well, you've got to have
Yeah.
an act. And so I worked diligently at creating an act. And I was a funny kid. I was the youngest of 9 children. I was, the funny kid in school, and I was a class president. I could be on stage, all that kind of thing. So that's the deal. That's what I quit my job in 94 to become a professional Bill Clinton impersonator comedian.
Fascinating. I knew I was going to be excited for this discussion with you to learn more about your background. I didn't anticipate that. That wasn't on my bingo card, as they say.
Well, I mean, you're a member of our Business of Ag Success group. You've been on my Business of Agriculture podcast, and we roughly know each other. We're going to see each other next week.
Right.
And you didn't know all of that.
Now I do. I love it.
So the Bill Clinton thing was that was the stepping stone.
That was the impetus. Love it. So now your whole shtick is you're a speaker. You also own a farm. So tell me about those two things. How did Bill Clinton impersonation turn into speaking on the topics of agriculture? And then also tell me about the farm.
Right. So was out there busting it to do Bill Clinton, and that was my only income. That was it. I had quit corporate, and so I quit my $33,000 a year job in 1994, and it was sink or swim. I lived in the upstairs of my buddy's condo, and I had one of those glue together desks that you like buy in a box and bolt together, and I had a phone and a fax machine, and I grabbed some milk crates and made my shelves, and my shelves had then VHS tapes of me doing my Bill Clinton show and promotional packets, which you used to back then put together packages and mail them out, and postcards and brochures. This is again pre-internet. So I would send out all, Al Gore hadn't invented it yet. You can look that up also when you're looking up all this other stuff. Anyway, so I sold, and because I had a sales background and always understood the business, I would sit there and call people. And then if I did a gig for $300 and people go and say, hey, that's really funny. You know what? I'm having a cocktail party, $300 act. A lot of people can afford a $300 act, even 31 years ago. So the $300 act becomes a $500 show. And so every gig, I said my goal was every gig that I did, I wanted to get another gig because that kept the bills paid, right? And I was still paying off my college debt to Purdue and my Chevy Lumina payment. That was my company car that I had to buy. So I looked at it as every gig you do, get another gig. And I also looked at it as I don't turn any gig down because that's like getting paid to go to the gym.
Sure.
I think that the business lessons, I mean, I knew more about the business side. But my friend that I've known since childhood lived with me. And he said something a year or two, and he's like, hey, man, I've been your pretend Secret Service man at 100 gigs because I did every gig you could imagine. And he said, I've been on stage with you at least 100 times, and I watch Comedy Central. And he's like, I know, I watch shows, and I watch comedy. He said, let me tell you, you're a B to B plus on stage. But you're an A at that desk and running it as a business. And so one thing that I've always told people when they say, hey, you used to be a comedy guy, you used to be and I've been in movies and TV shows and whatnot. So I've told people, and this is true about everything, when people think to be successful means being really good at being an agronomist or a feed nutritionist, or you name anything that's listening to our show, a food and beverage consultant. One thing that I've said my whole career, and I cut my teeth. Remember, I didn't come from nothing. I'm paying off my debt. I didn't have any inheritance. I'm the youngest of 9 from a very shoestring background farming operation. Hell, there wasn't enough money for my parents to have money, let alone give it to their kids. That I said, there's 4 letters in the word show. There's 8 letters in the word business. Put twice as much. And so think about what that means. put twice as much effort into the business as into the show. And also it becomes a given. You better have the show. Nobody's going to put you on stage if you completely suck. I mean, although there are people that completely suck,
Right.
you know, Amy Schumer comes to mind. But anyway, but I always looked at it as make it a business. So that was the thing, is that I sold it and I sold it and I sold it. And that was an important role to get there, was make the money, do the gig, and every gig try and turn that one into at least one more, and turn it into one. And what you always, then you start ascending and your act gets better. And you say, I want this show to not only get me one more, I want it to get me one more. Instead of a $500 gig, I want the next one to be $750.
Right.
Because then you're creating demand.
Yep.
And you're building the act. So then the act goes from 5 minutes of funnies to 10 to 20. By the time I'm say $1,000 or $1,500 act, I've got a solid 20-minute set.
Yeah.
And I can walk in, and then you start telling the client, yeah, I'm not just going to come in and you know, do what you tell me to do. Here's the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make it about you and we'll personalize it, but we're not going to come riding in on a donkey and, you know, let you throw pies at me. No, that's not what the show is. So, because you do everything you can early on. So I've always understood that part of it. And then,
you know, I think that that's a common thing for farm kids, is the work ethic that just gets instilled in you from the beginning. No one works harder. Right. Because it's just you, like you said, you know, you're 12 years old and you're the one that's out there breaking the ice cap on the trough so the cows can drink, right? Yeah. You know, no one works harder than a farm kid. And I think that's a really great key takeaway from this too. And the idea of more effort in the business side of it. You really have to be tight on that side of the house, regardless of what the other part of it is, right? What the business is in.
Okay, well, Agency 29, and I don't know a lot about it. I know a little bit about it. You probably have really good ideas and you're creative and you can help companies reposition themselves, and you can show a client really brilliant work. And God knows, in this era of computer graphics and artificial intelligence and all those tools that we have at our disposal, you can wow. I'm sure you could sit down with any food and beverage company and say, I'm going to wow the heck out of you. Yep, you did. That's fine. That becomes the given. You better be able to get on stage and be funny. Right. Now, how do you also then manage accounts receivable? You got some, hey, I'm really creative. I don't even like to deal with money. I'm a creative. Right. You and I both know people like that. I'm an artist. I don't want to fool with money. I'm like, well, good. You want to be an artist? Go down to the park and sit on a park bench and be entertaining and be creative. And all the other vagrants will love it, because that's where you're going to be. You have to make this a business. It has to have positive cash flow. You've got to pay your bills. You've got to invest for tomorrow. You've got to cultivate a client base. It is the business.
I totally agree. I went to school for graphic design and illustration. I went to school to be an artist. I always loved the business side of it, so I never wanted to be fine art. I loved advertising. I loved marketing. I wanted to apply creativity to those industries. But where we really started to get traction as the agency and grow and scale was when I stopped doing that. And I grew the business. That's my whole job, is growing the business. And then pass off the fish we catch to the team who's gonna, like you said, do the given, which is knock the work out of the park. And when we can leverage a reputation for knocking it out of the park, like you said, you need to be able to go on stage and deliver, right? But it's how do you build the snowball that's rolling down the hill, right? To continue to get bigger over time.
Yeah, it's the business side of it. And by the way, you get knocked. I mean, there's creative types. Remember Norman Rockwell? I've been to his museum in Vermont, and I've heard the art community. He is not an artist. He was an illustrator for a magazine. So it's as though somehow he has to suffer great indignity for his career even long after he's dead because he made money. See. I made money. I made money drawing and illustrating. What the hell? I mean, there's something wrong with that. So I've never had that problem. Right. They applaud Picasso. Selling a painting that I can't even understand. I can't see half the colors. I'm colorblind for $1 million. Somehow you're degraded if you're Norman Rockwell. So I've never bought into that.
I hear you. So take me back to my question. How did you go from the funnies to the more serious business of agriculture?
I was a Bill Clinton impersonator. We knew that that was going to have a ride. Again, you talk about farm kid work ethic. I was only in my 20s and early 30s. I never turned down work if I could, I mean, unless it was really cheap. But I obviously, hey, can you be in Sacramento and then 12 hours later be in Jacksonville? Absolutely. I busted it because I wanted to build, put some hay in the barn because I never had any hay in the barn. So I worked and worked and worked. I knew that after the inauguration of 2001, whoever came after Clinton, that things were going to slow down. But I knew that I still had enough comedy chops that I could tilt it. So we changed it then to he's still the ex-president. He's still funny. And so then it was, and then we were changing the approach that it's like, if you're a corporation, say, here's our new board of directors member. And so then I'd come in as Bill Clinton and still be funny. And then I'd make it about them. Hey, XYZ Corporation, here's what we're going to do. When I'm on the board of directors, we're going to hire more interns. Of course, that's fine. And whatever the thing was. So the problem is 9/11 happened in the year 2001. And so when you're a corporate, and I did associations and corporations, I didn't do club work. I had done some club work, but you don't get good money working comedy clubs. You get dumber audiences in comedy clubs. So I very quickly, political comedy worked back then for that crowd. So no corporate or association meeting really wanted political comedy after 9/11. They didn't want comedy at all. Well, hell, there weren't meetings for several months. People were terrified to get on airplanes. If I get on an airplane, they're going to fly it into a building and kill me. So things got really bad fast. I had just bought my first farm property in Indiana and was building a pole barn with an apartment in it. My wife and I were way ahead of the barn dominium movement. We were one of the first barn dominiums, and it was going to be my summer and fall getaway. So I was a little overextended, and then 9/11 happened. So then we lost all sorts of business meetings, and I was transitioning into my next career, and then trying to reinvent myself. And then also any investment money we had went south for a long stretch. So things got really tight. 2002, we started liquidating assets, and 2003 and 2004, I was throwing all kinds of stuff against the wall and trying to get stick. Tried to buy car washes using a friend of mine's money and my salesmanship and business skills. Got into landscaping again and did that a couple days a week. A friend of mine was so overwhelmed with his own landscaping business, he would toss me his side work. So did that. The good news is that forced me to be gone for 2 12-hour days per week on average, working physically to where I was exhausted. And what that meant was the other days when I was then at my desk, I had to focus. So I was still doing some Bill Clinton shows, and I was doing speaking as Damian, but I didn't really find my niche. I thought I was going to be this business guy. I was all over the place. And all of a sudden it kind of hit me. I'm like, wait a minute, ag, and funny. Why in the hell are you not being the ag funny guy who also has commentary? And so when I started putting that together about 2004, 2005, oh man. So then after 3 years of twisting the wind and struggling, and things were rough. I mean, it was a really difficult time. I felt like a failure because I had been in movies and, I'd been on stage 100 days a year doing my comedy show. And all of a sudden, a few years later, you're sitting there and you're twisting in the wind and and I didn't want to be, oh God, Jimmy Buffett in one of his books talked about what always drove him. He said, I was ascending as a music act. And he said, I'm at the Holodome in, Lebanon, Indiana or whatever. And there's a guy that had been a huge act and is on the way down. And he's now working the Holodome as a B act. I felt that way when things were declining, and I'm still grabbing some Bill Clinton shows for, a meager amount of money because I got to pay some bills.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what? This is not satisfying, and I'm better than this. And not that I wasn't willing to do the work, because again, that farm kid work ethic, I'm not going to, become a welfare recipient for crying out loud. I got over my skis. I lost a bunch of net worth. I've struggled here. So I would do the work, but I'm like, no, the next thing. So we invented really over a couple of years the Damian Mason product, and I'm not in any way being arrogant, but there's the Damian Mason that you and me are gonna have a drink and talk about stuff. But then there's this show, this product, this personality, this thing, and we really invented that. I invented that with the ag and funny. And then through the years, I came up with all of my stuff where then I became a stage act again that was hugely in demand at ag meetings, doing a lot of humor and a few points. And I had my t-shirts that said agriculture because starvation sucks. And that was kind of edgy and it was funny. I trademarked that. And I would fling out t-shirts and sell them. And I gave away bumper stickers that said that and was the smart, funny, comedic guy about ag who also had a few big points about the industry. So after doing that for a long while, some clients called up and said, "Hey, we know you're funny. We know you know ag. Can you do some more points on this business topic?" Like, I read to Wall Street. My degree's in agricultural economics. I own farms. I travel all over the world, literally all over North America. And every meeting I go to, I sit in on other sessions. I'm like, yeah, I can do all. So I kept getting on stage and doing this stuff. And like, well, we didn't know that you actually could talk about the demand structure on exports to Europe. I said, well, of course.
Right. But it was, of course, I love that realization because it was, of course, to you, but it's not common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love that. So, as you mentioned, I'm in your business of agriculture support group, which is just a bunch of ag nerds like you and I who all get together a couple times a month and sort of talk about what's happening. And I've noticed that you are full of knowledge on politics and agriculture and especially the international landscape, which, just like you said, for you was, you start getting asked about this sort of thing. And it's, oh, well, of course I know that because it was an interest, right? That you were just curious about and nurturing. But have you always had an interest in international politics? And like, what has that been like for you and meant for you in your career?
Yeah, probably so. I think it's the old thing about being curious and paying attention. What comedy is, and I tell my audiences this, comedy is tremendously difficult to make into a business. There's all kinds of people that are funny and they're sleeping on their buddy's couch in Los Angeles hoping they get a break, whatever. It's hard to turn into a business. It's hard to even do and be good at, but it's easy to explain. Comedy is observation with point of view and perspective delivered with a punchline. Observation, point of view and perspective. That's what makes it good. That's what makes it like you and I have had the same observation. Probably the comedian starts with the observation like, oh crap, yeah, I did see that. Puts his or her perspective on it and then delivers a punchline. So I've been an observer for a long time, and that's the thing. It starts with observation, paying attention, and then always taking a little deeper. I just was thinking on my hike this morning, Maureen, with my dogs. I'm like, if the American taxpayer was a little bit shocked over where USAID money was going, wait until they find out where the aid to Ukraine money went. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, do you really think that hundreds of billions of dollars ended up in some soldiers, ammunition out on the front line? Well, where did it go? I said, graft. So I've always looked at follow the money. One of my big observations is follow the money and look at what incentivizes. And so economics, long time ago, in Econ 415, I learned economics, you can talk about guns and butter and supply and demand charts and all that. Economics is about human decision making. Yeah. And so I always begin with what's driving these decisions? What's really happening over here? So like you talked about some of the international stuff, and we say international politics, people probably assume you're going to get into a conflict or a debate. No. Let's just look at some realities. Like I've talked about the Brazil thing. And right now, the former president of Brazil is being charged. And the current president was a criminal and actually came from a career political family, fairly criminal, senile, and got installed in to be the new president. And when it happened, there was a lot of calls for this election actually looks rigged. And there was a storming of the presidential palace. I'm like, does any of this sound familiar at all? And there's also a tremendous amount of evidence that there were overtures and influence from outside countries like China. So when I point out to my ag crowds, like, because most people just don't pay attention, they don't
Mm-hmm.
observe. And I
Mm-hmm.
read voraciously. I'm
Mm-hmm.
a voracious reader, but I pay attention to as many different things as I can. And when I demonstrate this to my audience, is like, oh, I said, look it up. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is true. Um, wait a minute, why would this matter? I said, because China is making Brazil their satellite country.
Mm.
They are going to try and they can't thumb us. We're too big of an economy. We're 27% of the global economy. Brazil's a few percent of the global economy. So they can put their thumb on.
Yep.
So I like to pay attention again. What's the economics of it and who benefits from it? Is
Mm-hmm.
you start asking those questions and then look into things enough, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you said, follow the money. I personally, I have a lot of interest in learning all aspects of agriculture too, similar to you, right? I go to these, I'm engaged to speak at a conference, and I really enjoy sitting in the other sessions and learning about, different niches of the industry that I may not have known.
Is it a niche or a niche? Is it a niche or a niche?
Niche.
I think it's niche. I think it's niche.
Well, tomato. I also don't say voracious the same as you.
You don't say what?
Voracious.
I
Voracious
say
reader.
all right, I'll call voracious. I will concede voracious.
Okay.
I will never concede niche.
I can't wait to read this on the transcript. So what are your thoughts with your knowledge and your perspective and your opinion? What are your thoughts on the future of the ag industry? Where's it going?
I just recorded the Business of Agriculture, my show yesterday, for March release, and it's about this guy right here, RFK Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And I've covered this from a few different angles, and there's people that think, oh, you're obsessed. I'm like, no, I'm not obsessed at all. I'm intrigued. And for instance, I put out there on my social media, I said, what if RFK Jr. pushes for a hard push for a switch to organic agriculture?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I got all kinds of, it's interesting. You know how it is. I got hate mail. I got people because, yes, of course. So I had people calling me a liberal that have no idea how I am politically. I had people telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, whatever. Here's the thing. He is not in charge of the United States Department of Agriculture. You can say he's not in charge of agricultural policy. I'm going to just point this out. You and I are recording this on February 21st, I think it is. 2 days
Yes.
ago, 2 days ago, the United States Department of Agriculture announced that food policy for SNAP recipients, SNAP Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps.
Yep.
About 41 to 43 million, depending on the week, 41 to 43 million. That's about 11 to 13% of the United States of America. We don't know exactly how many people we even have in this country at this point, but are on these programs. And there are big changes coming to the SNAP about the type of food that you can
Mm-hmm.
eat. And it looks like they're going to incentivize, maybe it'll be, you can get more food for less money if it's deemed healthy.
Oh, wow.
Less food. It looks like this is the way it's going to go.
Yeah.
Less, you can't use
Less
it.
if you buy Twinkies, more if you buy tomatoes.
There you go.
Love it.
Now, here's the thing. Where do you think that? Do you think the morbidly obese welfare recipient holding on to their 64-ounce Slurpee coming out of 7-Eleven with their Twinkies and their lottery tickets, do you think that person pushed for that new change? Do you think they're the one that lobbied USDA, or do you think it was RFK Jr.? Who do you think had the? So when I have ag people tell me that I'm barking up a tree, RFK is not really going to influence ag policy, I'm like, what the hell are you not watching? I just explained this whole SNAP proposal 2 days ago. It's absolutely because of him. Where do you think the red dye being taken out of children's cereal came from before he was even, that was his. So I'm saying he is an activist and he is having an impact on agriculture. And actually some of it's not bad. But I proposed, what if he wants to push for organic? I am not an organic zealot, nor am I wacky against organic. I think any way you can make a living. Your father had to get out of dairy. I know people that were farmers that went broke. You know, what if you...
Well, and in some industries, it's just not possible, right? Like we work with wineries, vineyards. Organic is not possible for them, or there will not be a crop, right? Powdery mildew in the Finger Lakes, right, is something that's constantly discussed. They must spray for powdery mildew or they will lose the crop. Guaranteed.
So it shouldn't be required. It should be obviously the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that he's an organic zealot. He is on the record in an interview with Dr. Phil, another credible source, of course, stating that we could cure the cure the epidemic of diabetes if we switched everybody over to an organic diet. Well, that's not true at all. Or diabetes is not caused because you ate,
Right.
conventionally raised
Right.
grapes or whatever. So I think that what do I see? You asked me the question, where do I see agriculture going? I think that in the next 4 years, he's going to have an outsized influence on things. You know what? I posed a question. What if there were incentives? He's quoted as saying we need to incentivize more regenerative. He didn't use the word organic because it's such a lightning rod. Or incentivize more regenerative and no-till, etc. I don't disagree. It kind of is being incentivized. What if?
Right.
What if USDA policy starts not only incentivizing healthier food consumption through the welfare programs, what if it also incentivizes a style of production? Hey, you can't make money in your first 2 years trying to switch over to organic.
Right.
We're going to subsidize that. What if that happens?
Right. Yeah. And I think, maybe this is where I'm naive, but I like to think that people come from a good place and are well-intentioned. Right. And when politics come in, like you said, follow the money, that it's not, there are ulterior motives, right, to consider and everything like that. But to me, I mean, the idea of incentivizing healthy eating for SNAP recipients sounds like a great program. Incentivizing regenerative, I think, is problematic because regenerative is still yet to be defined. And what does it mean? What are the practices? But if we're talking about incentivizing sustainable practices, absolutely. That's an easy one that USDA has already backed with Climate Smart Commodities Grant and so on, which I think is a remarkable program.
By the way, it's remarkable, but there's a lot of money there's a lot of froth. There was a lot of froth equaling almost fraud, but yeah, go ahead.
I hear you on that. And I'm sure you're right, based on how it was distributed and managed and everything like that. But, I talked to a winery in the Finger Lakes yesterday who bought 40 acres of vineyard in the region and is working on converting it to organic. And she is going through exactly what you just explained, right? She's going to have some years where she has either no production or very low production while she's converting that vineyard from conventional to organic, right? And again, it's very ambitious to consider going organic as opposed to regenerative or sustainable or something like that, but to actually seek the certification is challenging. So I like to think that, people are coming from a good place, but again, you make a good point that there's financial incentives, which is compelling.
And I pointed out again, I'm the person that's creating the thought. And I just said, even though I think RFK Jr. is kind of wacky on a lot of things, what if there was a thing that said we're going to incentivize and we would like 20% of America's cropland acres to be organic in the next 5 years, and there was and again, I'm not lobbying for this. I'm just saying, what if it were?
Yep.
You know what it would do? It would actually serve as a supply management tool. Since we are oversupplied right now, generally commodity production is decreased by about 20% when you switch to organic, and sometimes more, depending on the crop. Like you said, you almost can't do organic grapes, whereas organic alfalfa isn't so different.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's certain stuff that really lends itself well to an organic model, and there's certain stuff that's like, oh God, we can't do it at all. So it would actually serve to decrease supply. The only thing is the marketplace even demanding it? And that's the tough part.
Right.
In other words, the push for cage-free eggs. Well, right now, more eggs are being produced cage-free than are actually even being demanded and paid a premium for. So a bunch of producers made a switch, and they're not getting any premium for it. And that's the tough part when you say, oh, 25% is going to be organic. Only 10% of the marketplace cares about organic. That's the tough part. It's a distortion.
Right. And some of it's the cost justification isn't there, right? For the consumer, that the reason that they're not switching is because they can't pay the premium, or they choose not to pay the premium. They want to, again, follow the money, right? It connects to that as well. What is next for you?
Does anybody else come on the Spilled Salt show and have this much good fun stuff to talk about? Yeah, you called me a contrarian.
Yes.
I've been nothing but concise, comedic. I'm gonna use as many cut words as possible here. Complimentary.
I appreciate it. What's next for you?
Congenial.
What are you excited about for the future? What's coming down the pike that you're excited about?
Excited about in this industry in general. I think that the technology thing is good, but also overwhelming. So it's sometimes exciting, sometimes overwhelming. I think that we do have a marketplace that is more accepting than it has ever been to diversity of offerings.
Mhm.
I remember going to the grocery store as a little kid, and granted, it was in a factory in Farmingtown, Huntington, Indiana. It wasn't like, but there was no Whole Food. I mean, there
Right.
really wasn't.
Right.
And there's still no Whole Food in Huntington, Indiana, but there is, not too far away.
Yep.
So the offering for the consumer should be an exciting thing for ag. I know that the coffee shop, they ain't going to tell me how to farm type of a farmer crowd. Well, they're getting quickly bypassed, and they can sit there and fold their arms and put their head in the sand, whatever, whatever statement you want to call, or, you want to compare. But I would say what we have is a marketplace that is very diverse for a lot of offerings that gives a lot of opportunity. We are absolutely probably moving into huge, large scale commodity production on the farm. And then there's going to be everything else. And that's fine, because once you say, I actually believe that what we might move into is there's going to be corn for ethanol and livestock, and then there's going to be corn for human consumption. I really think that we're going to start making that divergent switch, and that way, hey, you don't even need to complain anymore, consumer, about GMOs, because guess what? That's all going in either your gas tank or into cow feed.
Yep.
The stuff that you're eating in your Doritos or in your cornmeal. That's here. I think that's what we're going to start doing, because traceability, Maureen, is getting so much easier through technology. So I would think that those are things we should be excited about, because I think there's an opportunity for value add. And again, you went into your business to add value, to create brands and create opportunity. And that's where, look at what ag has so often gravitated toward is, you just go out there and produce a commodity. You go ahead and just make us number 2 yellow corn, or make us your basic milk, and we'll make the money off of it in the value added stream. You just go ahead and be a good little peasant. And so I think we should be excited throughout the industry of the ability to value add.
Well, that couldn't connect better to the first episode in this season of the podcast. I interviewed Greg Jaffe, who is a former senior advisor with USDA, talked a lot about the bioeconomy. And so that ties in so well to what you're talking about here in terms of what's being produced, for what purpose, that sort of stuff. So anybody who may not have listened to that, go back and listen to that one on the heels of this. Thank you for your spirit, as always, Damian Mason. I appreciate you joining me today on the podcast. Let everybody know where they can find you.
DamianMason.com. You can find all of my socials. You can find how to get a hold of me. Damian, Damian, Mason like a bricklayer.com. And I do enjoy being here. And I was coming up with some more words, between congenial and comedic and conspiratorial. I don't know. What did you say it was? Not confrontational.
No, not confrontation. Contrarian.
Sometimes. Anyway, you're the bomb, and I really appreciate you having me on here.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me. Thank you for listening to Spilled Salt. I'm your host, Maureen Ballatori. Spilled Salt is an Agency 29 production. Agency 29 is a brand-building firm for food, beverage, and agriculture brands. Learn more at agency29.com. For more information about the podcast, visit spilledsaltpodcast.com. Use that website to send me questions or recommendations for future guests. I always love hearing from you. Spilled Salt is available anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. Please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.